Hello. We learned today that Boris is almost certainly going to face MPs, and we're hearing of a number of MPs who have now written to the chair of the 1922 committee. That's Graham Brady. He keeps this information very close to his chest, so we're not going to learn until that magic number of 54 is actually achieved. But the 1922 committee was set up 100 years ago, and it's a sort of backbench conservative organisation that was set up originally to militate against the premiership of the Liberal Prime Minister Lloyd George, and he himself and that government was itself enmired in sleaze. Originally, Lloyd George was the man who won the war, the man who won the khaki election that followed the war, and he had enormous prestige. And then it all went wrong. At the time, Andrew Bonar Law said that Lloyd George was the man who could be MP, he could be Prime Minister for life. And yet, only 4 years later, in 1922, a group assembled in the Carlton Club in October, and it was led by Austen Chamberlain, and he was the half-brother of Neville Chamberlain, who became Prime Minister himself, and he was the Prime Minister that took us into World War II. And that meeting in the Carlton Club in October, that was the meeting that decided the fate of Lloyd George. That brought Lloyd George down. So the 1922 club, or the 1922 committee, has from its very beginnings been a committee which meets to decide when prime ministers go. It did it for Mrs. Thatcher. It did it for Mrs. May, really. It did it for Macmillan. It's the 1922 committee is the source of the men in grey suits. They ditched Lloyd George, and they've never really taken breath since. And not only did they ditch Lloyd George, but they also, in getting rid of that coalition government, they spelt the end of the Liberal Party in power. And Nick Clegg managed to get back into power in a modest way with David Cameron, but really it's not going to happen again. So the 1922 committee is extraordinarily powerful. And why was it annoyed with Lord George? Because of the broken promises, in his case to returning soldiers to the mining industry, and because of the wealth of personal scandals, which were then sung about in cheap songs. We should never forget the importance of cheap songs. And Lloyd George knew my father knew Lloyd George, and all that sort of stuff. Lloyd George was a rake. Lloyd George, like perhaps more recent, and indeed perhaps even sitting MPs, had a problem in the trousers department. And that doesn't bode well. It's not a respectable image for a Prime Minister. But there we are. I'd love to know your thoughts on this, and whether or not you have more information than I do. How long is Boris going to survive with the 1922 committee getting ready to fire on all cylinders?